Hi guys, Sony just released the brand new ZV-E10 Mark II, and I gave that camera a thorough review. Forbes magazine is saying it's the best review of all time. I didn't really check, I just assume they are saying that, but a lot of people in my comments were of course saying, what about the A6700? I know it's a little more expensive, but that camera seems to have everything the ZV-E10 II has and more. What about that camera? Well, there are some major differences between the two cameras besides the price, so why don't we talk about it? Now, it is true that Sony took some of the gizzards and the innards of an A6700, put it in a ZV body, and left some key features out so that the price could be down and beginner filmmakers could have this type of image quality. This is an A6700 right here. You have this type of image quality with a cheaper camera. Both cameras share the same 26 megapixel sensor, so the image quality in photos and video is going to be virtually identical. I will throw up a side-by-side here of the ZV-E10 Mark II and the A6700 with the same lens. As you can see, it looks pretty much the same. And that sensor will give you sharp 4K video that's downsampled from 5.6K. You get 10-bit 422, 14 plus stops of dynamic range, all-eye codecs, Sony's latest and greatest touch menu system, which I find very easy to navigate, same 1.04 million dot LCD screen, the same FZ100 battery for long record times, the same SD card slot on the side, and the same ports as well. And that slot on the side that houses the SD card only houses one SD card for both cameras. They both have 360-degree fully articulating screens. You get great features like focus breathing compensation, focus mapping, all picture profiles including S-Cinetone, a bunch of Sony creative looks, the ability to completely separate your photos from video, so if you're switching back and forth between photo or video, you will have different settings. They won't carry over. They have the exact same rolling shutter, which is measured at about 16 milliseconds, which is better than something like an A7 IV or a Panasonic S5 II, but not as good as an A7S III or a ZV-E10 that's around 8 milliseconds, but still very good for an APS-C camera. They both have the new time-lapse mode, where a time-lapse can be made in camera for you, and they have 4K 30 USB-C streaming. I am a huge fan of that. And of course, both cameras record gyro data to the SD card, so you can stabilize in post if you need to with Catalyst Browse or a program like GyroFlow. When it comes to overheating, I find in a controlled environment, this studio specifically 23 degrees, I get 4K 24 as long as I want on both cameras. 4K 60, I get a little longer with the ZV-E10 Mark II, maybe because of that little crop, but I usually get about an hour to an hour and 10 on the ZV-E10 Mark II, whereas I get about 40 minutes or so on the A6700. The A6700 will overheat fast in 4K 20, usually 10 to 20 minutes, and the ZV-E10 doesn't have 4K 120 at all. Now, other people have done overheating tests. Gerald Undone took the ZV-E10 out into very warm environments out in the sunshine, and of course, you are going to get overheating times right there, but I find it's very good in the studio itself. When it comes to USB-C streaming, once again, the ZV-E10 II does a little bit better. I can stream as long as I want with the ZV-E10 Mark II, whereas the A6700, it usually dies after about an hour in my environment. Either way, I'm going to use that little Ulanzi cooling fan if I'm ever streaming for long periods of time with both of those cameras, just to be safe. Of course, your times may vary depending on the ambient temperature of where you live. So now let's talk about the differences. I will name the advantages for the A6700 and the advantages for the ZV-E10 Mark II. And there are some advantages for the ZV-E10. Okay, first and foremost, we have a 2.36 million dot EVF, electronic viewfinder, the thing you hold up to your eye when you want to take a photograph, especially in nice sunny weather. And while 2.36 million dots is not an amazing EVF, it is a pretty good EVF, and the ZV-E10 doesn't have one at all. When it is bright outside, you are going to miss that EVF, especially when you want to take photos. Another difference on the body is weather sealing. The A6700 is weather sealed, but the ZV-E10 Mark II, at least Sony is not mentioning any weather sealing, so I assume it is not a weather sealed camera, so this will be better in the elements. And sticking with the body, this has a front dial. So you have a rear dial and a front dial, and I certainly prefer that as a photographer, and I know most photographers prefer having two dials on the top of their camera. You have to use the jog wheel on the back of the ZV-E10 Mark II. You also have 2 more customizable buttons on the A6700, which can help you speed up your workflow. And of course, up top, we have the PASM dial. It helps you switch quickly between modes or your custom modes, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II, you will have to do that from the menu system. Now, one of the differences in video, it's a small one, but I should mention it, is in the 4K 60 mode, there is no crop at all in the A6700 or the FX30 for that matter. When you switch from 4K 24 to 4K 60, you won't see any change in the frame, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II is about, it's not even a 1.1 times crop, it's about a 1.06 times crop, but it is there, and when you switch back and forth, it does pinch in a little tiny bit. And the fact that it does do that may be a clue as to why they left out the 4K 120 on the ZV-E10 Mark II. The A6700 has 4K 120, but not the ZV-E10 Mark II. Now, this is at a substantial crop, a 1.5 times crop for 4K 120, so you're going to want some decent light if you're shooting 4K 120 with the A6700. Still, it's much better to have it than to not have it. Since the ZV-E10 Mark II does crop in a little bit in 4K 60, maybe they just couldn't make it work in 4K 120 without cropping in way too far, at least in their opinion. I am only speculating. They haven't told me what the reason is. Maybe the reason is just to protect their flagship A6700. I am not sure, but it's strange that 4K 60 crops in a little bit, whereas it doesn't on the A6700. Another really big advantage for the A6700 is IBIS. It has in-body image stabilization right there in the camera, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II only has electronic stabilization. So the crop, when you're in active stabilization mode with the A6700, is only about 12%. Whereas the crop when you're in active stabilization mode of the ZV-E10 Mark II is 33%. Let me just take you out into the real world and show you what that looks like right now. Check this out, the 11mm f1.8 doing my S-Log3 color grading, active stabilization, get a nice smooth footage with that enhanced electronic stabilization. Now, of course, I always recommend the 11mm f1.8 from Sony because when it comes to vlogging, that is, you get this bigger field of view, and it's even bigger here on the A6700 than the ZV-E10 because there's less of a crop. This is the kit lens right here with the color grading that I like to do, 10-bit 422 S-Log3 with a leaming LUT. I am on a selfie stick, extending it out, and I have a little Hollyland microphone. That button is actually a microphone. So I really like this setup, and I think it's very doable. So now if you are going to vlog with the 16-50 kit lens or maybe the Sony 15mm f1.4 or the Sigma 16mm, you are going to be much better off with the A6700. Ironically, it would be a better vlogging camera for you. So as strange as it is to say, the A6700 is a better vlogging camera in terms of stabilization. It is a little bit heavier than the ZV-E10 Mark II, but it's really great to have that IBIS in there. Now, I should say, while it crops in 33%, I was impressed with the E-stabilization of the ZV-E10 Mark II. It does look nice and smooth to me as long as you're not going too herky-jerky with your camera. And of course, you always have the option of using the gyro data, so you don't have to put on any stabilization, no crop whatsoever, and then you crop it in post to your liking until the footage comes out very smooth. I personally love to do that. Some people find it very cumbersome. It takes a long time on many people's computers to render the footage through Catalyst Browse or GyroFlow. And if you want to use 10-bit footage with Sony software, you have to upgrade to the paid Catalyst Prepare. I personally just use the free program, Catalyst Browse. Even on my 10-bit footage, I think it looks great, and for my vlogs, it really serves my purpose. Now, this one can be a deal breaker for some people, and that is mechanical shutter. A6700 has it, ZV-E10 Mark II does not. So if you're indoors and there's some LED lights going on, you may get some banding in your images. Now, it does have variable shutter, the ZV-E10 Mark II, so sometimes you can dial away that banding and take a shot, but with mechanical mechanical shutter, you are absolutely safe. And also, if the object is moving really fast or you're panning very fast with your camera, with an E shutter only, you may get some curves in your lines, some bends in your lines. The 16 milliseconds of rolling shutter is not bad, but it is not enough to mitigate really fast moving objects. So you take a big golf swing, something like that, you may see a bend in the pole. The A6700 also has that new Sony dedicated AI chip. So you can do auto framing with this camera, and the autofocus will be improved. The autofocus is amazing on the ZV-E10 Mark II, but this one can do even more. It can detect more objects, planes, trains, automobiles, insects. It can all be picked up and programmed into this camera right here, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II, it only does humans, animals, and birds. And lastly, we have a faster flash sync speed of 1/160 for the A6700 compared to a maxing out of 1/30 for the ZV-E10 Mark II. Now, some of those are major benefits for the A6700, and I can see those benefits swaying a whole lot of people, but of course, we have to mention the advantages that the ZV-E10 Mark II has over this camera. So first of all, it is smaller and lighter, 377 grams body alone with the battery inside, compared to 493 grams for the A6700. The A6700 is definitely not a heavy camera and very usable to carry around all day. However, it is noticeable how light the ZV-E10 Mark II is. The ZV-E10 Mark II has the zoom rocker, which some people really like for video shooting. You can control your power zooms with that zoom rocker, and you can also set up your clear image zoom there and control that from the zoom rocker. And since the clear image zoom is so useful on this camera, then I really like using the zoom rocker. Now, some people don't like it because they can bump it by accident and zoom in when they don't want to, and I do wish Sony had a way to disable the zoom rocker. Sony, if you're watching this, and I know you're not, please give me a section in the menu so I could disable the zoom rocker when I want. The ZV-E10 Mark II has the best in-camera mic of any Sony camera. So it's a 3-capsule microphone. It can pick up sounds from the front if you want, behind if you want. You can set it to auto, and it comes with a little furry hat, a little Don King wig. You just stick that on there, and that really helps with the sound. The A6700, not only is the microphone not as good, it is simply unusable unless you have like a lavalier, something plugged into it, because there's no way to cut down the wind noise. The second you take any camera out into the world, any slight breeze will ruin your audio unless you have some kind of wind muff or wind protection. I don't say dead cat because I have a cat and I love her very much. So if you plan to have a bare bones, no fuss, no muss setup, then the ZV-E10 Mark II is the way to go because of that internal mic. Product showcase mode. This is the mode a lot of content creators find useful, ones that have to hold things up to the camera and demonstrate. Goes boom, right to the camera and then back to your pretty face. Whereas the A6700, you can set up a similar type of autofocus, but you are going to have to dig through the menus to do that, and then do that again with the menus to get back to your regular autofocus instead of the touch of one button. And even if you want to set it up to a custom button, it'll take a couple of buttons before you get that autofocus like a product showcase mode. Now, while both cameras feature vertical video, you can just turn it vertically like this and then it stays that way in post. You don't have to rotate it in post. The icons actually rotate as well for the ZV-E10 Mark II. That is the first Sony camera that has ever had that. Now, hopefully that will be an update in the A6700 and all of the Sony cameras, but that is very cool to have. Photos while you're filming video. The ZV-E10 Mark II can do it. The A6700, at least at this point, cannot. So it's under the chapter marker setting. So you just add chapter markers with pictures. So it adds a chapter marker and a JPEG as well. It spits that out when you're done. So you get the JPEGs or chapter markers by touching the shutter button or on the back of the screen there. You have the beginner friendly background defocus button. So with the touch of a button, you can make your background clear or blurry. And for a lot of new people, that will be helpful. You have the fun little feature of Cine Vlog on the ZV-E10 Mark II. Just put black bars over the top and the bottom and then switches to 24 frames per second and then puts you in a Cinetone or another automatic mode and just gives you a straight out of camera, more cinematic feel. Now here's something I didn't even mention in my full review of the ZV-E10 Mark II. You can do a shutter speed of 1/48 or 1/96 in the regular mode of the ZV-E10 Mark II. The A6700, it does 1/50 or 1/100. It can't do the 1/48 or 1/96 like the ZV-E10 Mark II. The FX30 that you're looking at right now, that can also do those shutter speeds. Now, it does have variable shutter on the A6700 as well as the ZV-E10 Mark II, but this is in the standard mode of shutter, not variable shutter. So you can really do that double your frame rate. So you're doing 24 frames per second, you can do 1/48 just for that perfect amount of smoothness on your ZV-E10 Mark II. Hopefully they'll bring that to the A6700 as well. And of course, we can't forget about what might be the biggest advantage for the ZV-E10 Mark II, and that is the price. It is in the US $1,000 versus $1,400 for the A6700. $400, 40% more when you buy the A6700. So a lot of people in my comments were saying, why don't you just get the A6700? Well, not everybody is going to budget $1,400 for a body alone. That $400 could get you the excellent Sigma 16mm f1.4, and now with that ZV-E10 Mark II, you can have a great little studio setup. Or that $400 gets you almost all the way to a Sony 11mm f1.8, and then you have that fantastic vlogging setup, the little ZV-E10 Mark II and that Sony 11mm, which gives you plenty of a wide field of view even at that 33% crop. So now, depending on what country you live in, weird things can happen with the prices. So if the ZV-E10 Mark II is close in price to the A6700, then I think the A6700 is the better buy. I believe that is Sony's best value camera overall. It's a fantastic hybrid camera. It really is a great camera at photos and video. An absolutely wonderful camera, 4K 120 IBIS system, mechanical shutter, but here in North America, you do have to pay for it. But there will be plenty of people who will want that image quality of the A6700 and FX30 for that matter in a cheaper camera body. So you just get some of the goodness without some of the extras that maybe those people don't need, and those people probably appreciate the price difference. In my opinion, you can't go wrong with either of these cameras, and I will put my money where my mouth is. I own the A6700, and I'm also pre-ordering the ZV-E10 Mark II. I am currently using the FX30, and I love the idea of being able to interchange these cameras, get different angles, do different things, take one out vlogging, take one out for pictures, take one in the studio here, mix all the footage together, and they will look great. But that's just me. I'm obsessed with cameras. I don't know if you could tell from Camera Crisis. That is my channel, and I'm crazy. Anyway, thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye. Oh, tell me down below what you guys think. What would you do? Which would you pick? I fixed my sign.